Good morning, guys. So today we're going to read chapter 9 of The Case of the Stolen Sculpture. And as I said yesterday, I wanted you to make your final predictions as to who you think stole the statue, if that person acted alone, or if they worked with somebody else. And many of you suspected Mr. Carbony. So we're going to find out if you were correct. And if you remember when we left off on chapter 8, the kids are starting to really suspect him, and they said they were going to find some proof. So that's where we begin on in chapter 9, is getting proof. I don't get it, Clementine said a few minutes later as they stood in front of the closed door to Mr. Carbony's office. I thought we already cleared Mr. Carbony. He wasn't on the camera footage from the weekend, Rainey pointed out. No one was, Amal. That bothered me too, Wilson admitted. But then I realized that Mr. Carbony didn't need to come in over the weekend. If he hurried up to the third floor right after opening, he could have snatched the statue after the motion cameras were turned off. Why would he do it, though? Clementine asked, slumping against the closed door. But the moment the words left her mouth, she knew. The insurance money! He needed it for his new wing. Suddenly, Clementine was falling backward into the office. Mr. Carbony jumped to the side, and Clementine fell through the doorway and landed on the floor. Ow, she said, rubbing her hip. What are you four doing here? Mr. Carbony said, obviously angry. Were you listening at the door? Would we have heard anything good? Rainey asked, grinning slyly. Mr. Carbony ignored him. You four better explain yourselves, or I'll have Dr. Wim down here to drag you out of this museum for good. I'll explain, Wilson said, but first, maybe you better call Dr. Wim. She's going to want to hear this too. So remember that these little stars or asterisks mean that there's a little bit of a break in time. Dr. Wim showed up moments later. All right, she said, sitting on the couch in Mr. Carbony's office and crossing her legs. I'm here. What am I supposed to hear? Wilson explained to Dr. Wim, with Mr. Carbony listening closely as well, his theory of the crime. By the time he was done, having implicated both Mr. Carbony and Mr. Preston in the theft, Dr. Wim and Mr. Carbony were nearly in tears with laughter. Wilson, Dr. Wim said, getting up from the couch and putting a hand on Wilson's shoulder, Mr. Carbony didn't steal the statue of Gudea. It surprised me too, Mom, Clementine said, but it had to be him. That's right, Amal added. Mr. Preston told us that Mr. Carbony asked him to go easy on the investigation so the insurance payout would come quickly. He obviously wanted to get his hands on the money for his new wing. Mr. Carbony's face flushed red. He stammered and smiled and shuffled the papers on his desk. See, Clementine said to her mom, he can't even deny it. But I do, Mr. Carbony hurried to say. That is, I do deny stealing the Gudea. He opened his mouth to say something else, but seemed to think better of it and quickly looked down at his desk again. But, Dr. Wim said, standing up straight and crossing her arms. But, Mr. Carbony said, unable to look Dr. Wim in the eyes. Well, his face flushed, and he said, I did ask Mr. Preston to take the investigation lightly. How could you do that? Dr. Wim scolded, her eyebrows high and fierce. Look what we're about to accomplish, Mr. Carbony said, puffed up with pride. The new wing. My new wing. Look how proud he looks. Oh, Mr. Carbony, Dr. Wim said, dropping onto the couch and shaking her head. This is insurance fraud. Is it? Mr. Carbony said as he dropped into his office chair. I hadn't thought of that. He scratched his chin and twisted his mouth. Then he stared at the ceiling as if deep in thought. Clementine noticed that Wilson had been looking more and more confused as the adult spoke. Finally, he said, Wait a minute. If Mr. Carbony only meddled but didn't actually steal the piece, then... The four friends looked at each other. Then they all turned back to Mr. Carbony and exclaimed, The gift shop! Mr. Carbony nearly fell out of his chair. What? Clementine stepped up to his desk. You worked the gift shop register Tuesday morning, right? Yes, Mr. Carbony said slowly. Mr. Saunders was late again. Why do you ask? Did a woman come in and buy an item? Clementine mimed a box about 1 by 2 feet, about this big, and have it boxed as a gift? Yesterday morning? Carbony asked. No, a woman did come in, but she only asked for an old box I had behind the counter, so I gave it to her. Clementine frowned and nodded slowly. I think she needed that box, she said, to hold the Gudea. And that's where this chapter ends. So it looks like we definitely did confirm that Mr. Carbony is involved, but now we need to figure out where the Gudea is and exactly what happened. So your job in this section is to describe what happened in this chapter. Remember that when you're summarizing, it's usually about 4 to 5 sentences. You're describing the main points of the chapter, the ones that basically just describe the highlights of what happened. And then you're going to predict, where do you think the Gudea is now? Okay, so just 2 questions for Reader's Workshop. Then for Writer's Workshop today, I really loved all the things that you wrote yesterday, and I really enjoyed reading about who you would invite to dinner. And I liked this one a lot too. So it says, let me start with the title. When this is over, what will you hold on to? This time has brought lots of changes in our personal, school, and family lives. Some changes way harder, some things for the better. So we want you to take some time to reflect. What do you plan to keep doing that maybe you didn't do before after this is over? What are some changes you've made that aren't so bad after all? So here are just some examples. You eat dinner together as a family more often. Maybe you started doing things together like puzzles or riding bikes, movie nights, reading, bubble baths, family walks, and journaling and cooking. I know that my family has definitely done more things together, like movie nights and game nights, and we all take the dog for a walk instead of just one person. So there are definitely things that have been better since the quarantine. There are definitely some things that I want to get back to, but those are some of the things that I will hold on to. So what are some of the things you would like to hold on to with your family? Okay, so those are the 2 things for today. Also, just a reminder, tomorrow is your last day of remote learning for the week, because Friday and Monday is Memorial Day. So you get a little break. So we'll find out what happens. We'll read the last chapter of The Stolen Sculpture tomorrow, and then you will be on your break. All right, so work hard today and tomorrow. You can do it.